Welcome to Verify in Field, the Millwork podcast. Here's Jacob.
Welcome back, everybody, to Verify in Field. Today, I have a very special guest for me, Geoffrey Athey, who is Regional Director at Stiles Machinery. So many of you maybe know him and his role over the last few years there over the South Central region in particular. But also has a great deal of experience in our industry, before Stiles in manufacturing and operations, has been a great dear friend of mine in this industry and mentor over the last few years. So I'm excited to chat with you today, Geoffrey. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, I'm excited to be with you talking about the industry. It's been great to watch you take on this new role, not only as a new business owner in the industry, but also as someone who wants to help the industry raise the level, entire industry. So it's been great.
Thank you.
Good work.
I think maybe to get started, is for those who don't know or about your background, could you give us just a little bit of an overview of your journey, how you got started in millwork?
Sure.
And some of your experience to where you're at today?
So was medically retired from the Army in 2000, and at that time the whole world was going bonkers. It was just busy. All corporate America was hiring all of the military officers they could get a hold of because it was so growing so fast, everything. And I ended up taking a job at Fujitsu Network Communications as a manufacturing supervisor. This was my first job in manufacturing in 2000, and over an 8-year period, progressively more responsibility there. Left Fujitsu and left manufacturing for a couple of years to an executive minister role up in the Washington, D.C. area. It was kind of interesting. And then came back to North Texas, looking around, wanting to stay in manufacturing operations, and was hired by Tony Ewing at Advanced Fixtures as his engineering manager, and then quickly moved into a VP role for manufacturing operations because it's more my gig than engineering manager.
Yeah.
So it's been great. I spent 4 years there. Since that time, I did some consulting work in the commercial architectural millwork world, primarily with EGR in Oklahoma City. Was a general manager for Burt Clothier for the Laminate Works Dallas facility until that was sold to Wilson Art, and then went to work for Sunrise Wood Designs as a COO, doing 100 houses, custom residential house cabinetry a week. That was an interesting logistical nut, if you will. So really just heavy into the operations piece. I've been with Stiles now since COVID. Kind of an interesting story how I got there, but we'll save that for a later day. But with Stiles, started as a product specialist in the panel dividing area, doing saws in stores, sheet good retrieval systems, and then unfortunately, our regional director in South Central died, Bob Langridge, and he had suggested to the executive team that I should take his place, and so I'm grateful to him for a lot of reasons, but not the way you want to get a promotion, right?
Yeah. Awesome. So, definitely a unique journey, coming from the military, coming in out of the Army into manufacturing, not in millwork, right? But by way of manufacturing is kind of how you came into millwork and have stayed close to operations manufacturing throughout your career, right?
It's a fascinating piece because it's, essentially, if it's made out of wood, it's because it's custom, right? Mm-hmm. If it wasn't custom, we make it out of plastic or metal or something that we could stamp out, right, very quickly, or injection mold. But wood is custom. And the interesting piece about what my work at Fujitsu was, and it was in a very build-to-order environment where didn't know day to day what we were going to build, right? So had about 300 different products that we built in my group, and every day was a different challenge. And so that really kind of led my thinking in custom manufacturing, if you will. Obviously, the electronics industry doesn't have to deal with sheet good yield or board feet, but it really influenced how I went about trying to improve manufacturing operations.
Yeah. Did you, so, that was going to be my next question is obviously that's a unique perspective coming into our industry. And I think millwork has, over the last 2 decades or so started adopting and integrating lean manufacturing principles and things like that. Right. But by and large, I'd say a lot of mill workers still see as like, oh, well, we're not manufacturers. That doesn't apply to us. Like everything we do is custom. Do you still get a lot of that, or did you get a lot of that throughout your career?
I did, especially when I got into the wood side of the world. They were like, yeah, we can't do lean because we're wood. And there's clearly a place where if you strictly look at the Toyota way, the Toyota production system, which is an assembly environment, not a true one-off manufacturing environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
The principles don't all apply the same way. They just don't.
Right.
But the Toyota consultants that go all over the world to teach lean will be the first ones to tell you, don't try to implement their system.
Right.
Right? Your environment is different than a large automobile manufacturer. So implement the principles in a way that makes sense for you. And so there's been that, and where I see the shift in thinking is when you start talking about batch sizes through our shops, right? We say we're truly custom, regardless. And it's funny that the residential guys will tell you that the commercial guys don't really do custom because they just build this stuff or whatever. There's schools and hospitals. They just repeat the architectural millwork guys will say, well, the residential guys don't really do custom. They're all just cabinets, right? It's just cabinets. Mm-hmm. And they'll both say the retail store fixture guys, they don't do custom. They do the same thing over and over and over. But I can tell you when a company like PetSmarts buys all the real estate for Old Navy, which happened in my career, right? Old Navy went out and PetSmart bought a bunch of those locations. Well, every single one of those locations had a different footprint from each other, and they were all different from PetSmart. So it was custom, baby. I mean, it was, if it's wood, there's a reason why it's wood. It's because it's custom, right?
Yeah.
And so when you start looking at that batch size conversation, you've heard the phrase batch size 1, which is a little ridiculous, frankly, when you're trying to deal with sheet yield or board foot yield. Getting to 1 may be the wrong answer, but 1,000 is the wrong answer too.
Yeah.
Right. So where is that balance? And that's where I think, we did a breakout session at the AWI Spring Leadership Conference, and because I was asked to, I was a little surprised at how many people set in on that and were very engaged in how big should our batch size be, because they recognize, people are recognizing at different levels that there is a batch size that's too big. Mm-hmm. Right? So how do I get the work through the shop? So that's the conversation I get into a lot.
Yeah. And it is interesting because as you now had the privilege to visit many shops and now and work and consult with many, many shop owners and many different facilities. And I think what never ceases to surprise me is how often I see the same dilemmas, the same problems, the same, things. And you talk to everybody, and it's like, oh, well, we're unique, we're custom, we're different than everybody else. Right. And it's like, no, you're experiencing the same things in this industry. Owners and shop guys don't talk to each other. It's only kind of happens when people kind of get, recruited from this shop to that they're like, oh, well, yeah, this is how we handled that. But there's still not a lot of like, hey, maybe there is some things we could all learn from each other, and some things, even though that I'm sharing something I've learned, that I still can learn some other things from you. And I think batch size is one of those things that's very interesting, because out of my time at USA Millwork, we had 5 facilities, and we had, what was always crazy to me was somehow these 5 unique facilities that each had extensive history and very successful in their own right in different regions of the U.S., different product types.
Right.
Somehow they had all come to 5 different conclusions of what was the best way.
Yep.
And they were different. They all did things differently, but their way, they had figured out this is the best. And there's not a lot of introspection in this industry, one of how different the product type, the client mix, the regional things can affect you. But that also, like, hey, maybe the conclusion your owner arrived at 20 years ago isn't really the conclusion anymore.
Right. Yeah. It's to your point. I think I tried to a few weeks ago try to figure out like how many shops have I been in the last 3.5 years.
Yeah.
I think it's somewhere around 400. Now some of those are repeats probably, so maybe it's 350. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's a lot. It's a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And I can tell you, I have the same conversations over and over and over and over. And it surrounds how do I get people, right? Labor is a big challenge. How do I automate to not rely on so many people when I have so much turnover? But then we very quickly get into in the manufacturing process, and it's a little different since as a regional director, I'm out there trying to sell a particular piece of equipment, and our sales guys are set up that way that they don't either. The product specialists are the only ones that, they're a saw guy come and talk to you. They won't talk about saws, right?
Right.
But the sales guys and myself, the sales manager, we're just like, how can we help? Like, where's your next step? And what I find fascinating about what you're doing is it doesn't take a lot of effort for us and our customers to completely overwhelm the engineering team. Right. We can find a bottleneck in the shop pretty quickly because that's where the whip piles up.
Mm-hmm.
Or we go into a shop where there's whip piled up everywhere, and then we're like, oh, okay, let's have a conversation about how you process things out on the shop floor and what's your batch size and what's going on and why is there so much whip, to try to help figure out where the bottlenecks really are. And it's not but a piece of equipment or two typically, and all of a sudden the engineering team's completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Right, because if you can't get the information, what we have found is this is something that I came to before I came to Styles, but the OEMs in our industry really are information managers. They're not manufacturers first, right? And what I've seen is those that manage the information the best are the ones that are winning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? The ones that are consistently competitive in their chosen market are the ones that communicate better with each other internally, communicate with their customers better, and the information flows through engineering and through the shop and to the install team very smoothly. Those are the ones that are winning in the market.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it comes down to relying on people versus process a lot of the time. And in our industry, especially, because we've been woodwork and millwork and casework for decades, if not centuries, right? And without technology, largely, right? Without software and without engineers. And so that department, that function of like, hey, there's these people that before any sawdust is created, we used to have story sticks and cut lists on paper and that type of stuff. The guys at the bench were doing that. And since we've now introduced CNC equipment and then somebody who has to program that, and the way our industry evolved that was like, well, we've got the guy who understands how to do it without this, and he's later in career. Now let's teach him how to use software, teach him how to use CAD and CAM. But our companies have become dependent on those people. And now, and what happens is you end up in like a decade or several decade cycle of like, well, we've got it figured out because we've got Jim in the corner and he does all that and we rely on him. We don't know how he does it, but we just know we can trust him. Well, when Jim goes to retire or Jim gets poached by somebody else, that's when the problem rears its head and you realize, or when we want to sell more than what Jim can handle, then it rears its head. And so
like how do we build flexible capacity into the system? And we don't, that's a hugely important conversation that we don't often get to have.
Yeah.
Is how do you build flexibility and elasticity in your system? Because if you don't do it, look at the architectural millwork side, commercial architectural millwork side, average win rate out of their estimating departments somewhere around 25%. So one in four jobs they win, except when they don't, right? And they're slow in the shop,
right?
And they're worried about laying people off because what happens if I do and then I get another 2 jobs and then I got to get them back, and that's hard, if not
Right.
impossible. Or they 1 and 4 and then they don't because they win 2 and 4, 3 in a row, and all of a sudden they're out of capacity. And unless you build a system that has elasticity in it, either through outsourcing with a company like Duckware, part of it on the engineering side, but in the machine side, you can build elasticity in your system very easily with a system that's got more capacity than you need today, right?
Hmm.
If you're going to spend some money, it's not typically you can come in at the level you're at and then step it up a notch without the difference is not a lot typically.
Yep. Well, in almost every shop I've been in, one, if you're slow, you turn a machine off or it operates at a lower rate, right?
Yep.
But generally, people aren't laying people off. That's like a last
Because you
resort.
can't afford to get them back.
Right. And
Right.
so it's always like, oh, well, we'll go sell some work at a loss to keep them busy. And if we get super busy in manufacturing or at install, you can outsource install. That's very common in our industry, right? Hey, let's get some other guys, get some crews.
Right.
Or people ready, like, hey, let's get some laborers in here. And my finishing guy is going to supervise 4 guys, teach them how to sand, and he can scale up.
Yeah.
Or I can get a couple handlers to offload the edge bander, right? Like that is easier than it is. You can't do that in your office,
Right.
And it's
Right.
not like people can say, oh, shoot, we've got twice our capacity in engineering. That's not something anybody's figured out how to do. And you really can't easily just go say, oh, well, I've got some guys that know CAD and I only need them for 2 weeks. And so I think that is really much still a modern dilemma in our industry. Like I was saying before, we've been manufacturing this stuff for centuries. And we've been selling woodwork for centuries. And most business owners in this industry came from manufacturing as a craftsman, or they understand the sales side and the relationships. And they're like, I can solve those 2 problems. But this technology piece, this technical aspect, I can't just very easily scale up.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is you can, right? I mean, there's nothing more flexible than the technology, frankly, because you can turn it on and off, right? And you can scale it up and down. If the process is put in place or well established and people understand what they are, you can just turn the knob up a little bit. People don't have to work harder. You're getting more out.
Yeah.
The more we get people to understand that, the more they're able to. And I think that's part of why we have companies who focus on just making parts for people, right? They're the buffer in their market, right? Why those people exist, and there's a niche for that. And if you've got a large enough population in an area, you can need 2 or 3 of those kind of folks because every few months the estimating cycle hits weird and somebody gets overloaded. And it's a different person every other month, right?
Throughout your career, shifting gears a little bit, throughout your career in Millwork proper, right? Obviously you've been in a lot of different companies and a lot of different, sides of the business. You've seen a little bit of everything. What do you feel like, what changes that are significant that you feel you've seen in your time in this industry that have stood out as either, obviously we had COVID, we had that event, but, are there any other significant changes that you've seen that have kind of fundamentally changed our industry?
So when I first got into the wood industry, was at a retail store fixture company, Advanced Fixtures, right? And I'm looking around, and they're a fairly advanced, in our industry, fairly advanced company in terms of ERPs and design software and machinery. They've kind of done a leading edge of technology for a while, right? So, but I'm looking around going, I didn't know that they were that far ahead. I just assumed, most wood industry companies are that way. But even then, even 2011 when I started there, my thought was, wow, these guys are about 20 years behind the electronics manufacturing industry. When you think about that for a second, right?
Yeah.
20 years. So that was 2011. I see that we're catching up. That's the change I see. I think we're less than 10 years behind now. If we were 20 years behind then, that makes sense. I still see a lot our industry is so fractured. There's so many different companies doing the same things that it's going to take a while for it all to trickle down. But I think the companies that are consistently investing in technology and software are catching up very, very quickly. And their cost structures are different, right? They're able to be flexible, use their people in multiple ways. They're able to attack different segments in the markets. Like we have commercial guys doing residential and residential guys doing commercial. We see that more and more, right? But it requires a level of technology that didn't exist 10 years ago, frankly,
Right.
outside of a few exceptions. The other thing I see is a larger understanding that there's a need for good data and metrics. So we talk a lot about efficiency and operational excellence and utilization rates, and I think the big metric that is missing that can drive our businesses is cycle time. I know you didn't ask about what's missing, but it's the piece that I talk a lot about with somebody who gets interested in the actual professionally run manufacturing operations teams.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing custom work, it's not tact time like you read about in the Toyota Way or from Ishikawa's, lean manufacturing textbooks. That's tact time. That works great if you have an assembly line and every X number of minutes you're going to output a product. That's not what we do. That's not our industry, right? But cycle time, where you can track the amount of work in process you have through your process and how much overall output you get out on a consistent basis, and come up with weekly and monthly averages and begin to drive that number down. Those are the companies that are able to make big plays in the market in terms of cost, because you drive out things like rework.
Mm-hmm.
It requires you to go to smaller batches. It requires you to think differently. It significantly reduces your rework, and it significantly reduces problems in the field. And when the problems do show up in the field, you're able to respond quickly enough, in most cases, to get the product to them before they have to leave the site. So you don't have redeployment costs. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are built into that. But the ones that kind of get that and are doing it, they're able to bid for jobs in new ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think on that, I think what I've seen a lot is owners who, in a void of real data, latch on to what they can see and what they can track. And so that comes down to, things like sheets count at the saw. They'll
Right.
measure productivity by one, looking around the shop floor, like, hey, how many parts do I see? Oh, we're doing a good job because I see a lot of stuff.
Right.
Or they'll see, sheet goods consumed. Oh man, we went through this many sheets of plywood this week. We're doing good. And that's where also you see them chasing things like yield.
Right.
And when they're losing their ass on labor, and they don't know that. And so do you think that...
But it's easy to do, right? Because a sheet of materials in a cabinet, roughly, right?
Mhm.
And you know that if you're doing residential and maybe you're doing 25 cabinets at houses, right? That's your sweet spot on your houses you're working on. So that's 25 sheets of material, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I know if I'm going to do 5 houses a week, that's 5 times 25. It's easy math, right?
Yeah.
So at 125 sheets, if I don't cut up and I have to reorder 125 sheets, I know I'm getting behind. The problem is it's looking at the wrong end of the chain.
Yeah.
And it happens in engineering too,
Mm-hmm.
right? We make sure we got jobs at the saw. Make sure we got jobs at the saw. Instead of, hey, this one's got to ship and install this date, which is where we should be focused, right?
Yeah.
And when you start pulling, and I don't care if we have customers that release 5-6 days at a time on the saw just so the saw stays busy, and you put all that whip in there, and it looks like a snake swallowing a rat going through the facility, right? When if they did just broke that up into half a day chunks, or even better, eventually where you want to get is a couple hours at a time.
Yeah.
If you release more than you titrate the work out and make sure it's coming off the back end at the same level. People ask me a lot, well, what size batch should I use? Well, I don't know. It depends on how fast your facility is.
Yeah.
Right? You've got whip in certain places as buffers on your processes. And what that whip is, here in Texas, people go tubing on the Guadalupe, right? But only certain times a year, because other times a year, in like August, your butt's bumping on the rocks. It's not much
Right.
fun, right? So what is whip? So whip is a way to keep the water level up, so there's no obstructions. But the problem is it hides the rocks. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you can drain that whip down until you hit a rock, and then pick it back up a little bit while you solve that problem, then you drain it down a little more, hit another rock, bring it back up, solve that problem. All of a sudden, you can get down where you've just got a couple hours worth of work, because you can solve anything typically in a well-run, well-maintained environment in a couple hours.
Right. Yeah. I mean, something I've seen a lot is, well, hey, we'll put 100 cabinets in a batch, or even more, right? And it's they're all the same. Let's just batch them out. And you get the things
they're all the same, but we're custom, right?
Yes, yeah. And not only that, but the site doesn't need them all at once.
Right.
You can't even deliver them to the site at once, and you definitely can't quality control 100 cabinets at once. And so what happens is you end up with, and they're going into different rooms that actually need other products. So I've seen this a ton where we have installers on the job site, and they're like, hey, well, I've got tall cabinets in all my classrooms, but I'm missing all the others. I can't install any countertops. Right. And 50% of them came with issues because nobody caught them. And so you're creating more issues.
A progress payment because you don't have any rooms complete.
Right.
Right. In the school world, you've got to complete rooms to count off. I've got this % done.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
And then your installers are back charging you because they're, going from room to room to room and mobilizing constantly.
Right.
So I think there's stuff like that yes, it looks good, and a lot of it happens as a symptom of other problems. As owners, like, well, this other job that I had planned on working on came late. Materials for this job are here, so let's go. I need to keep my shop going, and they're thinking kind of right, like, hey, I'm losing money if I'm not building something, right? I've got people here sitting doing nothing, and so a lot of times it becomes a decision that owners make out of a reaction to other problems in their business.
True. And there's ways to do it. If you have a way to QC it, your processes are strong enough. There's nothing wrong with building all your talls and putting them in stock in a warehouse if you've got warehouse space to keep your shop busy. I don't have a problem with that. What I get stuck on is when you're doing that, you don't have a place to put it. It's clogged up your lanes to the point where you can't get anything through, and your guys are moving everything 16 times. Yeah. And that just creates damage. It creates problems, right? So some of it's facility dependent. The Sunrise Wood Designs, when I was working there as their COO, we were installing 100 houses a week. There's not warehouse space to store 100 houses. Right? 25 to 30 cabinets each. Like, they're just massive amounts of space required for that. We cut stuff the day before we started cutting stuff for the door department 2 days before, but essentially there was a 3-day cycle through the shop, and we were assembling it the night before it shipped out to install because there was no place to put it. Right? So you have to manage based on your facility. I mean, there's a lot of pieces for sure. Yeah, and the common in that industry is there's, in this retail industry, at least here in the DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth area, North Texas, it's not unusual. They're building so many houses to get behind a little bit on a street. We might be trying to install 4, 5, 6 sets of houses in that neighborhood, that subdivision for a particular builder on any given day or two, right? But it's not uncommon to get behind on one house or another, and you can whine and cry and complain about it. The fact that the builder says, "Hey, we're not ready," you're going to have to hold them, or you
Right.
can be proactive about it. And one thing Sunrise is really good at is they call that builder. And I'm not talking about the D.R. Horton corporate office. I'm talking about the builder assigned to that neighborhood. They call that builder 5 times in the 6 weeks prior to delivery, right? And twice during the last week. The balloons are interesting. So they've taken a very proactive approach and said, look, we can't store this stuff, so we've got to make sure. And then after all that, if the builder calls and said, "Hey man, I'm sorry, we got behind," we're able to say, "Well, okay, give me an address. What garage do you want me to set these in? Because they can't stay here. Like, we gave you enough notice."
Yeah.
And the corporate office understands our process. There's and they do tours of, they bring people into the shop and say, "Where are we supposed to put stuff?" Right? Yeah. So you do a lot of educating of your customers, and it can set you up for success really well, right?
They've created a feedback loop of data that informs their manufacturing decision real time. Hey, okay,
Right.
when are they going to be ready and for how many kitchens? And that's
Yep.
what we're going to make.
Yep. Exactly.
Looking forward a little bit now, looking ahead, what do you see? Obviously, you've said data, I think is going to continue to be more and more important. I think especially now that we have better tools to get that data, right? Better touch points and stuff. But, what do you see continuing to shape the millwork industry in the years to come? Whether that's advancements in manufacturing technology.
Yeah. So obviously there's a labor shortage, right, in the trades. That's nationwide.
Yep.
We can talk all we want about we can train people, but the baby boomers are retiring.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a Gen Xer, and I'm watching them kind of walk away going, and I'm looking around, wait a minute, where's those guys that knew how to do all that stuff?
Yeah.
So what I see is a greater and greater reliance on the design and software side of the world, because you don't have Joe or Jim in the corner anymore, like you mentioned earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those master craftsmen that from a generation who just figured stuff out on their own no longer have those guys that can figure anything out, that have enough experience in their pocket to go, we shouldn't do that, or maybe we could try this. We see less and less experience in the shop. And so there's a need for controlling quality in a way that we didn't have 10 years ago. You have to build it into the process. You have to build an engineering process. You have to build it into the machining process. You have to do extra machining steps to make sure there's only one way to put it together,
Mm-hmm.
right? We used to make everything symmetrical. Guys in the shop knew how to make it right. That's not there anymore. So you have to intentionally machine things so that you can't put it together backwards, because they will, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we'll see more and more and more of that. And I think frankly, as a lot of business ownership, we're seeing the biggest transfer in business ownership ever in our industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
In many industries, but I think in this industry in particular, as younger generations, it's like we've skipped the Gen X for the most part. Like, the baby boomers are transferring to millennials, right? Which is
Yeah.
interesting. Most of us Gen Xers are okay with that. We're tired anyway.
Yeah.
But I think what I see, the millennials are very data savvy in general. And so they want more information. What do you mean cycle time? How do I measure that? What are we looking at? Why is that important? And Why is stall utilization important? Why are we even tracking that? I got to get stuff shipped, and they're asking more logical, reasonable questions.
Right.
So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, and I think a couple things related to that. One, I think there's a huge opportunity so I think it's important for people in our industry, especially those baby boomers and the Gen Xers, the people that are, we're facing down this problem. And I think it's very easy to get frustrated of okay, we have people in this industry. We have a lack of people, but the people we have, it's very easy to get frustrated. Like, well, why don't you have the experience? You're not. And I think if we're not consciously reminding ourselves that boomer that has done this for 30 or 40 years, like that experience doesn't just happen. Mm-mm. Like it's experience.
Like
and
he
so
figured it out over time.
Yeah. And I think, and that we're realizing, yeah, you can too. And I think that takes time, and realizing that we're realizing we have this problem too late to fix it today, but that doesn't mean we can't start investing in those people to get that experience. And so I think that the dynamic is different. It looks very different today for young people to make a decision on their career than it did 20, 30, 40 years ago. It is much less affordable, and there's a lot less upside that people have looking at this industry, and people have more options. And so I think, you can be frustrated about that, and you can blame that on whatever political party you want or whatever decision or whoever. It doesn't change the circumstance of what those young people have. And they're making a decision based on a different set of circumstances than you did in your day. And that just is what it is. And so it's okay. From that, how do we move forward from that? On the flip side, for those young people that are in this industry and you're trying to make a career decision, there is opportunity here because there's such a lack of that experience. If you can be that, you have a career. I mean, I feel like I'm living proof, right? I've put time in to be very, I had a decision early on to kind of be either double and triple down on the technical side, engineering, what I was doing, right? Or I could have gone architecture. I could have tried to I had an opportunity to go be a COO, to go kind of more the operations route. We need all those things, but I knew for my particular set of skills, my experience that I already had to date, that I felt like, okay, if I really double and triple down on this niche set of skills that I don't see anybody else is taking the claim to being the expert at, I feel confident that I will at least never run out of a job or something to do.
Right.
And so I think that, yes, there's other things, I could make more money in another career field or be more successful or have more fame or whatever it is, but that wasn't what was important to me. What was important to me is security and one, having something that I felt like I was very good at, and my skills catered themselves to being very good at a specific set of tasks and skills.
Well, I think all of us have a set of skills that lead us to be very, very good. And if we can dig into that one thing, we can add so much more valuable. I mean, I love arranging the pieces so that there's synergy and synchronicity, right? That's what I love. Well, if that's what you love, you need to be an ops guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we do. It's like all of this stuff has to come together to get a specific goal. And so, in some ways it doesn't matter what industry for an ops guy, as long as it's complex enough to keep them interested. That's the piece, right? But this industry is fascinating to me. There's no other segment of the industry, with the possible exception of the metal industry. There's a lot of similarities between us and the metal industry, and I don't mean the import metal. I'm talking about one-off, custom metal. They have a sheet good yield problem. They have material problem. They have a labor management problem. So it's very similar. But we're not we don't make potato chips. How many potato chip companies are there? Not very many.
Right.
There's not very many plants that make potato chips. There's a lot of different kinds of potato chips, but the plants all the same plants make them all, right? And there's a big roll up and some power and numbers or whatever you want to say. I think there's 8 there's over 8,000 customers. We have over 8,000 customers in my region alone. That's crazy. In 12 states. That's crazy. And they're all different. Every single one of them. So it's fast. That's what's fascinating to me. They're all different. They're all doing it a different way, and they're all fighting the same challenges.
Yeah.
Right. I get. You were talking about. We were talking a little bit about labor a second ago. It reminded me of two examples. Liquid cabinetry up in Oklahoma. Figured out they needed to do different. Went through the Schuler consulting process, relayed out their shop, and they have a fantastic clean facility right now. They cut parts for other people to do their own jobs, but they, and I've asked them more than once, what's your actual capacity? I'm like, we don't know. This thing is so flexible. We've been able to ramp it up, get a lot out, and slow it down, and not get a lot out, and not change the number of people we have. And we have a great team. We don't have any turnover. Right? They've built a system that built that elasticity in. It's awesome. Another company, and I forgive me, I don't remember the name of the company. They're not in my region, but my product specialist that took my place, the panel dividing, went to the Store 200 class at Styles University, and one of the students in that class was a shop owner, and they had 5 people working there, and they were buying a saw, and a router. 5 people. Why would you do that? Makes no sense, right? From an operational efficiency and machine utilization point of view, it makes no sense. Because I get asked all the time, how big do you need to be before you get a store tech,
Right.
before a sheet good retrieval system? Well, this guy only has 5 people. But his whole thing is, I don't want my guys to work hard. I want to pay my guys a little more, keep them active, have extra capacity in the system that I don't have to ramp up and down in my hiring, and we can just have a solid team environment. It's a different way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
When I was 20, nobody in the manufacturing world thought that way. It was all about ramp up and ramp down labor. Well, when your labor market is under 4% unemployment, it's harder. Right? And this guy's like, look, I want a strong team. I want my team bought in. So I'm going to make their jobs easy, and we're going to build elasticity in the system. Right? He was implementing design software and other things as well. So I think to your question about what do I see changing? What I see changing is that kind of thinking, where it's not just about the numbers, it's also about my people. It's also about how do I stay competitive in the marketplace and not have to rely on hiring 10 people and letting them go in a year? That doesn't make any sense anymore.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think that is, we're seeing a big transition, as you said, in ownership, and I think generational change, and labor continues to be a big pain point for many.
The millennials don't want to work the hours the boomers worked.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure they're wrong. In fact, I'm
Right.
pretty sure they're right. The hours the boomers worked and a lot of the Xers are working, the 60, 70 hour, 80-hour weeks. Why? How does that a healthy way to live?
Well, and seeing that whole generation, how too many of them are ending their lives. That's what they're basing it off of. And like you said, is evaluating, is that worth it? Is that what we want? Is that what I want? As a millennial, to end up that way. Yes, there's outliers, but do we have the same upside economically that generation experienced?
That's a good question. I think you can get off on a political conversation real quick and talk about immigration, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, the millennials are a large group, and I think there's, from a spending point of view, what the economists are saying, the millennials will kind of help the economy stay strong, right? Eventually, when they get to their the height of their careers. But yeah, in the meantime, I think there are markets that are strong. If you look at the North Texas area, it's been the uh, top housing market in the country for almost 20 years. It's kind of crazy, really. But for whatever reason, economics and politics aside, people are moving here from all over the country. Idaho, crazily enough, is the fastest growing state. Idaho, right? I was born in Idaho, haven't lived there since I was 3, don't know much about it, but fastest growing state. So there's work, and what I see is as our demographic as a country is more and more mobile. People have, they want to go live where they want to live. I think there's a lot of work for woodworkers, a lot of work for millwork because of that.
Yeah.
If you're willing to follow it a little bit.
Yeah. No, I think there is so much opportunity in our industry, and I think it does take commitment to put in the work to get the experience, and there's opportunity there, and I think I'd love to see it be more, our industry do a better job at advertising that, do a better job at creating, clear paths, but or if you're willing to put in the work, gain the experience, come do the work and really niche down and specialize. Like you said, there are thousands of companies looking for, just in engineering, I hear from owners every day that are like, hey, I need an engineering leader. I need an engineering leader. And I wish there were more people of that caliber that I could recommend, because it does take time to get that.
I get those same, I don't do it, get those conversations every day, and I get requests for an engineer and plant managers. Those are the two that I could ask more about plant manager, but also engineers, at least once.
And what's
right.
interesting is those two roles in particular, by and large are kind of two roles that there's only usually one in each company.
Yep.
And it's usually that one person that stays in that role for many, many years, and they have a huge influence on that organization. You can have multiple estimators, multiple sales guys, multiple project managers, multiple, and now multiple engineers and other things, but that the leader, that plant manager, that engineering manager, those technical leaders usually affect the front and back of the house between the two of them. And you only have one. And a lot of times when they're there for a decade or 20 years. And so they are probably the hardest two to really fill well in our industry.
And you don't know what they know and don't know. You don't know what they've just deal with without thinking that, even if you were to sit down and ask them, okay, tell me about what kinds of things do you do on a regular basis? They'll forget half the stuff they do. They just will, because it's just second nature to them. Yeah, absolutely. And the crazy, like you said before, the crazy piece is they figured out how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So other people can too.
Yeah.
And those two people have to be able to work hand in glove. They've got to, they don't have to be best friends, but they got to probably be close enough friends to go on a 3-day camping trip, not kill each other, right?
Yeah. If they don't get along, everybody in the organization feels it.
Yeah. You think you have a turnover problem now? Get those two people not working together, then you got a real turnover problem.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Shifting gears a little bit, you and I have had the fortunate opportunity to be a part of a new committee by AWI, this technology committee, and it really just started, launched before Spring Leadership. So for those listening that don't know, if you're not a member of AWI, sorry, but you should be if you're in the commercial millwork world. And they have been putting a lot of effort, Doug Haig as CEO and Adria coming on. And there's a lot of great team members now that they've been doing a lot of efforts over the last few years. And part of that is providing education opportunities for membership. And one of those, they've asked Geoffrey and myself and a few other people from the machinery and technology side of the industry to find ways that we can add value, education, information, informed membership. And so we did a presentation at Spring Leadership, and we're just did yours is coming up, your family gathering about robotics and machinery and things like that. We did one about AI, and we'll be doing, And so you tell me a little bit about that, about, the things that we've been working on there and kind of how you're hoping we're able to add value from that?
Yeah, I think if we go back to the panel discussion we had at Spring Leadership, I think a couple of things really stood out to me. One was Jonah talking about sometimes you got to rip the Band-Aid off, right? If you're gonna really make your process efficient, sometimes you just got to go and start over. That's hard. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of grit, a lot of determination, right? And some good counsel. It's hard to do on your own. And the other thing that came out just really as a byproduct of the discussion, not because I'd planned it, but this concept of start now, start small, right? There's a clear sense of understanding, I think, in the industry that we have got to better our more consistent processes, and we've got to have to be able to provide more automation, because we're not going to be able to keep workers slinging full sheets around manually anymore, right? There's things like that where ergonomically people just aren't going to stand for it, be on a forklift all day slinging sheets. They're just not doing it.
Yeah.
It's harder and harder to get those people. So when you add those things together, you go, okay, well, that sounds like I got to change everything. Well, yeah, but you got to start somewhere, right? And so where I see, we've had a lot of discussion about what is automation, and from a machinery point of view, it's anything that saves labor, right? Any material handling is the most common piece, but that's only because we've figured out CNCs and we figured out saws a while ago. That would have been the big thing 15, 20 years ago, right?
Right.
But now it's how do we load those machines and unload those machines, and how do we get it to the next process without somebody breaking their back, because nobody wants to do that anymore, right?
Yeah.
And how do we do it without breaking the material and doing damage? And so I think that's where we'll see the conversation go. Also see it, we start talking about automation, you immediately today we go to robotics. And the way we do robotics today is it's interesting in that it's a kind of this scary thing. We put a big fence around it and don't let anybody near it. And so where I see the industry going with robotics is more, I think you've heard the term cobot,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where you're working right next to a robot and they're not killing you.
Yeah.
Right, because we figured out the system software and how to make them be able to work with this soft, fleshy thing without hurting it. So I'm interested to see how that shapes up in the next 10 years. I think that's going to be an interesting piece. But
Because other industries already have that, right?
Other industries already have that, yeah. So that's where we were talking about how segmented our industry is, right? If logistics was our bag and we were as big as Amazon, we would have figured that out already.
Yeah.
Right? But it's not. Wood is our bag, and there's too many customers without enough stake and without enough pockets to put the research and development into it. So by nature of our industry, it'll take a little while for that stuff to filter down to a level where it's accessible by our industry, I think.
Yeah.
But it's coming. It's coming. There's no doubt in my mind.
For sure. Well, awesome. So I think by the time that people are listening to this, your family gathering may have already happened. But if you are a member of AWI, come see us at National Conference in September. That technology committee that Geoffrey and I are a part of will be doing a panel there again. Also, if you're coming to IWF, would love to see you there. Both Geoffrey and I will be there. Geoffrey will be at the Styles booth. I'll be there. We'll be hopefully having dinner one of those evenings together as a part of that tech committee. And is there anything else, before we wrap up that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think the one other thing I wanted to mention, we're talking about labor and getting people trained for the industry, right? I love stuff that some of the educational groups around the country are doing, like the Mill out in Colorado, but even more so what Pittsburgh State University has become, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's really the go-to source for young people who are excited and passionate about our industry and smart about our industry because they've actually got a bachelor's degree in wood products manufacturing. Is what we do, right? We
Yeah.
manufacture wood products. So I would highly encourage the audience, if you're going to be at IWF, go spend some time with the PSU team. They're going to have a booth there. It'll be in the other building away from the machines.
Charlie and Jordan.
Charlie and Jordan, great guys. Meet some of the students, recognize how critical those young people are going to be in the industry. I've been associated with that group now for about 13 years, and I've hired 6 or 7 of those students, and they just do extremely well. They're running plants, 3 and 4 years in, they're become plant managers, which is unusual, right? You don't do it that fast.
Yeah.
Engineering managers, they're really sharp, hungry, humble, smart, right? They get it, they want it, and they're the kind of people that will be leading our industry. And so I highly encourage people to look out for the Pittsburgh State University guys.
There's a lot of good graduates already in our industry. I had Christopher Wernemont, actually, if you go back and you listen to the podcast, he was on here. He's a graduate who's now in a very interesting master's program. Court is, we've got John Van Erum, Doug Haig at AWI. Right. So there's many generations of graduates now that are making an impact in our industry.
And they're working everywhere. A couple of guys, the Pitt State grads from several years past now. Justin Hopper is one of our product specialists for solid wood. John Barnes is the key account manager for windows and doors nationwide for Styles. So we're kind of spread out now all over the industry, and it's fun to see.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Geoffrey, thank you so much for spending time with me and sharing with our audience and everything that you do in our industry. Always, it's a pleasure when I get to hang out with you and chat. So enjoy that on a personal note. So, and until next time, and look forward to seeing you at IWF.
Thanks, Jacob. Look forward to it.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Do you want to stay up to date about industry insights, new content, and our community of millworkers? Go to ductworksmw.com to sign up for our newsletter. I'll see you in the next episode of Verify in Field.